Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending.
It is.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this evening's meeting. And I would like to welcome our guest for this evening, Chief Executive Ian Davidson. So, to start with agenda item one, apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillor Bensalem with no substitution, and it was hoped that the leader would be here to present item 6 on the agenda, but has given his apologies.
Okay, thank you for that. With that in mind, with the committee's permission, I'd like to ask for a separate meeting with the leader and any relevant cabinet meeting for this committee, and that to be held in public. Are you happy to do that?
Just to emphasise, Chairman, that you're proposing not to take item 6 this evening, and that instead you're going to seek this separate meeting with the leader and any relevant cabinet members at a future date, and that be a public meeting as this is.
We happy with that? Okay, thank you very much. The second item is minutes of the last meeting. Has everyone had a chance to look at those? Are you happy with them? Okay, could I have a proposer?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to move those, Chairman.
Thanks, Mark. And a seconder? Thanks, Sue. So I'm happy to sign those. Item 3, declarations of interest. If anyone has any declarations of interest. Okay, if anything does come up during the meeting, just quickly stick your hand up and we can get those recorded for you. Yes, Bernie?
Sorry?
I said if anything does come up during the meeting, just stick your hand up and we can get it declared. So thank you. Right, item 4, questions on notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38.
Thank you, Chair. There are none.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we move to item 5, which is the report of the Chief Executive A1, outcome of Spendle's House Capital Scheme Review, which is pages 15 to 26 on your paperwork. And what I'd like to say is, as the leader's not here, I think it would be good if we revisited this item at the meeting that we do hold with him. But the main part of the meeting is over to Mr. Davison. So over to you.
Councillor Hardywood, thank you very much indeed. Good evening, members. Want to talk through with you the report, which is ahead of you, but just sort of want to preface it by a few comments, so if you just bear with me. I find this hugely frustrating, and I know you've heard me say this before. Now, the reason I say it's really frustrating is because when we have important projects like this, we want to celebrate success, not having to justify success. Because this has been something which was started actually by yourself, Councillor Honeywood, when you were a portfolio holder. I think that everybody recognises the importance of temporary accommodation, the needs of temporary accommodation for our district, and the cost of temporary accommodation for our district. And so this scheme, which was started going back in 2017, is absolutely the right thing to put good quality accommodation in rather than poor quality accommodation, which is high cost. This is good quality accommodation, which is of a reasonable cost. I'm not saying it's not negligible, but it certainly is much more reasonable than long-term purchasing because of it being our building. So when I say it's frustrating for me personally, and it's frustrating, I think, for collectively as members as well, because we're talking about parts of why rather than the fact that celebrating that this has been a very good scheme which has delivered good quality accommodation. I think the other important thing about this is it's accommodation which is within our district for our residents. And inevitably there are times when our residents have issues within their lives, things go wrong, we all know. And as a result of that, keeping people in good quality accommodation, and sometimes it's families, being able to go to local schools, keeping their support networks around with them is so important. So again, it is so important. So many districts have to actually send people in for temporary accommodation out of the district. This project keeps people in our district. It's also predicted it saves between £200,000 and £250,000 a year. So again, it's the thing which is not only doing the right thing for our residents, but also it's about how does it save money long term for our residents. So to talk a bit about the report, so we had a scheme which, when you look back, was in the report, and it says in the background, which was about in 2017. The Cabinet received a report from the then portfolio holder, Councillor Honeywood, and approved the formal consultation of the future to 2 sheltered housing schemes, including Spendles House. Cabinet then looked in 2018, and in 2020, Cabinet decided to bring Spendles House back into use as temporary accommodation. For those who remember, it was actually formerly sheltered accommodation, and it was of poor quality in terms of being able to sheltered accommodation. So it was going to need a substantial amount of money and work on it in order to bring it up to the quality for good quality temporary accommodation for the support of as I've just been mentioning, for people who find themselves needing temporary accommodation. The procurement process was then completed within the council's rules, and the lowest tender was returned, was in the sum of 1.25 million. You've then got a series of dates of where things which happened. I'm not going to read those through to you. You've got those in front of you. I think that, but you can see that as we look through those, you can see that obviously there was a lot of engagement through the process. In terms of the looking at the dates there, I would just sort of say is that the decision on the 23rd of September, I will actually just pick up a few of those, a further decision by the Cabinet was proposed in order to consider a report on the review of the budget position. And that was because during that time, costs were increasing. We saw both in terms of cost of materials, in terms of cost of staffing, in terms of the cost of various different parts of it, and the full council decided to allocate additional funding for the project as part of the HRA budget spending. I think that all members throughout the process have been really supportive, knowing that this is the right thing to do, and have continued to support that, and even to this day. I mean, when I went to Audit Committee the other day and discussed the same report and very similar discussions, again, very supportive in terms of the principle of the work which was done. In March 2023, a proposal for further decision on the future of Spendles approved the financial business case, which was published 20th of June 23. Housing and Planning Portfolio and the leader of the council and the corporate finance and government portfolio holder considered an update on Spendles House and the review of the budget. And they noted the increase in costs to be financed through capital receipts, and noted the update business case and confirmed the support for the project. This is not a project in terms of the funding, which is actually it doesn't have the approval of the principle of doing this, and which is the irony, and obviously I'll come on to in a moment around the governance issues around that, because members have always been very supportive, and actually part of the problem has not been about, there's been no problem about members being supportive. It has been about the actual permissions and the governance in terms of some of the decisions which were made for part of the subsequent spend. The housing portfolio leader considered the further update, and then on the 1st of August 2023, the corporate director, in consultation with the portfolio holder, appointed ARC to complete the work and authorised the head of legal to enter into the construction contract. So, and then the work started on site in October 2023. So the position of the works, recognising that the increase in terms of the cost. But in May 2024, the report then was presented to Cabinet, which provided a further update on the provision of the temporary accommodation. The report also reported a review of the budget position, and also reference under Section 5 of the Local Government Housing Act to update on the progress. And this is where, in terms of just being clear what that means, this is where we said the project has had a number of series of additional spend requirements, but some of those decisions were not made, did not have decisions to go with them. So the spend hadn't been approved spend, had not been agreed spend. Now, the spend which you need, the process which, as you know, needs to go through governance in terms of whatever we spend, and the total cost of the contract and the project in total was 2.342 million. The additional spend, the additional cost of which was not approved, is the part which obviously the Section 5 notice refers to, and it's also the work which the reason why we had the report done, and I instigated a report to be done to understand why that happened and what were the issues in relation to that. So, in reporting the Section 5 and reporting that there'd been spend which had not been authorised, I instructed that a formal review be undertaken. So this is the review which has been undertaken. It's a factual report. There's two reports. The other report is purely about staffing matters, and that is the subject of further disciplinary proceedings, which will be taken forward in the normal way, which won't be reported back through open meetings. But just to say is that we will be continuing those, and it is partly with my absolute frustration that, as I say, such a good project ends up having to have that sort of taint to it when we should be actually, as I say, celebrating it. We also issued a directive to all senior managers relating to financial and budget management, which explains the consequence and expectations in their roles, and was supported by further collective meetings with senior officers and also with additional training. Commenced arrangements for the implementation of a senior project board, and also in terms of the ongoing sessions with the senior officers, and also ensuring that when new officers are promoted or employed, these things they are highlighted to them, their roles. There is already training, there is already our governance processes, but reinforcing that. I would say this is not about our systems in terms of failing. This is about the non-adherence to those systems in the issues, which is about the frustration. And Richard, as our Section 151 officer, can comment on that. But this is the outcome and the findings. I've also discussed this with our external auditors, and with audit committee in exactly the same way. So some of the findings which came out of this, and apologies for going on a little long. You know, if you ask me, that's the norm. But in this case, I think it's really important to talk it through. So I'll give that. So some of the key points. So if you go to on page 23, some of the key points identified against the key elements of the process. So the contract specification, if you're going to have a good contract specification, that's really important, because actually it ties down the accuracy of the contract, and actually makes more marginal the errors. There will be errors, and I don't say that any contract specification for a major building can be perfect, because you don't know what you're going to find. But actually, if you have a good contract specification and you have flexibility, it certainly should reduce and minimize those changes. I think that the other thing with a good specification is it minimises variations. Now, if you've got variations, of course, there's additional cost on variations, and in terms of minimising those variations, that's important. I think that one of the learnings which we're talking about here is that actually the quality of the contract specification, and actually the quality, in order to ensure of high quality for the scale of the scheme, I think we didn't get the right person to do the contract specification or ensure that it was of good enough quality. The management oversight, it took just over a year to produce a business case and appoint the contract to begin the works. I think there was an unclear process for dealing with the specifications, and part of the problem as you went through was that we had an officer who was dealing with the specification, dealing with the project. The senior officer who was overseeing that, unfortunately, went sick for a number of weeks, which the officer continued to do it, almost as a kind of the enthusiasm of getting it done, without sort of putting the hand up and saying, need more support on that. So I think that making sure in the, as it says here, period of long-term sickness, absence during the project related to oversight of the role. And therefore, it said may have benefited from additional capacity. I'll go a step further and say it would have benefited from additional capacity in terms of that support and giving that oversight. I think that also there was not sufficient oversight or discussion around the financial position of the project during their performance management meetings, the project management meetings. And I think that is an oversight which of course may have picked up some of the variations, may have picked up some of those issues as they came through. Now, I wouldn't say that all variations are wrong. Some variations, for very, very good reasons, are right. But if you then do have variations, you need to make sure you follow the governance procedures in order to say, hands up, I actually need to get some additional funding in and go to members to do that. Now, the key for that, of course, is that the junior officer who went through this, he understood the budget was there, and actually this is not about us having a hole in our budget because we do have the funding to do it. It was about making the decisions in order to put that additional funding in. So when that junior officer did not get those permissions because he thought I've got the budget, that was his lack of, if you like, sort of understanding of the governance. And I think that with hindsight's a wonderful thing. So I'm not going to say that it's anything's going to be perfect, but I will come on to how we're going to make it more perfect next time. In terms of the work which the more senior officer should have and would have picked up had he been available. And that comes into the unclear decision-making responsibilities where additional funding was required. The contract variation instructions were recorded on the contractor's system. Now, that's fine, but actually we should have had our own system to back that up, to confirm the variations. I think in terms of that is a learning point rather than that made any impact on him not getting the correct decisions. But actually, talking about wider learning, that's a different learning point about making sure that we also have that parallel system. And the contract variations were informed by the contractor after they identified the issues and then notifying the council. That we then assessed the request and a price given by the contractor in order to complete the variations. So again, the council was informed by the contractor. So I'm not saying the contractor didn't inform us. The council was informed by the contractor, but of course it's through their system. It would have been nice it should have had the backup of our system as well. Overspends first came to light in February 2024, and some of the issues could have been addressed, I think, earlier in the project if you'd looked at the variations. But they came to light in February 2024, and the process for managing variation orders was controlled by the contractor, not the council, although, as I said, that the process, as I mentioned earlier, around informing the council. And then variations approved without a financial quote being provided up front by the contractor. There can be cases where you exempt that because the contractor's in the midst of the work, but you do have to do it. So that's part of that process. And the systems, as you can, Rich and I sort of had a long conversation on this, the systems are there, it's just about them being followed. And then there was a misunderstanding. I think that leads back to the point about the person's lack of understanding of the fact that the budget was there, but they needed to get those approved. So the unauthorised spend was £386,535.12, to be exact. I think that if you look at the figure and you look at the overall project and what it's achieved and the feedback, this is not about was it the right project. I think all members have said to me that's not about that. It's about that unauthorised spend and making sure in future it doesn't happen again. So, although it's felt that the underlying current governance arrangements of the process are adequate, and as I say, we've spoken to our external auditors on that as well, a number of issues and recommendations have been identified regarding the projects, which we are taking forward. Rather than just sort of reading through those, I'll just make a general comment first, and then I'll just touch on a few of them. So we have got some of the biggest projects at the moment going through with this council that we've ever had. When you think about the coastal defences, which was 36 million, these are a total, if you add up the three alone, is 60 million. So we need to make sure that this sort of thing does not happen again. Now, how we do that is by we have employed a new team to project management and in terms of very experienced, and actually, if you watched the scrutiny, the audit committee, David Ousby came and spoke to them, and I'm sure we'll have to going through very impressively about how they manage and the scheme. There's also other staff which has come together to put a team in. So whereas before on that project, I think that it was done in-house. This is going to continue in-house, but we've employed a whole team to support the council in its work around the 60 million, but also around other projects as well. So far, I think they've been very impressive. You can see about specifications, and I've touched on those about must be robust. The things which are in here are predicated on making sure that we have the team there to do it, and that's why I highlight actually in predicating doing these things that the new team that we have now employed to carry that through. Because you're quite rightly would say to me is, how do you know that, much surety have you got that if we didn't get this right, are we going to have issues around £60 million plus on levelling up and the other iterations of the names of the titles of the funding? It's got different names, but if you'll just allow me to call it levelling up as a general term rather than all the individual details. And I think that if you look at the decision making, that's also about, and training, that's also about where Lisa and Richard and myself as your three statutory officers, and we have meetings together as with our titles as statutory officers, not as titles as chief executive and finance and legal, but actually as our statutory officers, in order to look at exactly this sort of thing to make sure that does not occur again. I think that the other thing is about how we cascade that down through to more junior officers and making sure that when they are taking part in projects, even at a junior level, that they fully understand what their role is. So in terms of summary and conclusions, I'll spare you rereading through those because they're there, but you can see the headings of contracts and management and oversight and strategic. I nearly read it through, didn't I? Decision making and project management, because they are really important. But they are really important if that structure behind it is there. So if I stop there, because I think that probably it's given you an oversight. So bluntly, in summary, it was a good project which had governance issues in terms of officers not getting approval for some of the additional variation works, which shouldn't have happened. And I'll apologise on behalf of for officers in that happening, and in terms of ensuring that for future it doesn't happen, and that's what we have put in place to make sure that the projects I've spoken about and others don't come forward. One thing I will say is about audit committee, and I'll refer to the same thing for you as well here. We've got other projects which are coming to conclusions now. I don't think there's any project where, if I'm really honest with you, nothing will go wrong. There's too many variants on these things. What I don't want to be is in the land of something being illegal spend and unlawful spend. What I do want to do is but there will be learning from those. So Councillor Honeywood's talked about at Cabinet only the other day about sunspots, and they'll be learning from that. They'll be learning from most of our projects. They'll be learning from when we do some of the coastal works, when we have to do, you name it, there we'll be learning from it. So what I'd say to you is that the learning which we've come out from this and from others, we said to Audit Committee we'll go back, and I think it's 6 months' time. I think I said I would be going back to Audit Committee, just because I like a good night out, to talk to them about the following on from the learning from other projects which we're doing. I'm not going to sit here and say there won't be learning when things won't have gone wrong, because that would be an absolute hostage to fortune. What I will say is we are looking at, and we've put in place measures to absolutely minimise any opportunity of that. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We do have a number of questions that we discussed beforehand. I assume you have a copy of those. So if I get each person to read out their question and then you can respond, that would be really helpful.
Very happy to do so. If I may, I've got answers here, but I may just elaborate a little.
Okay, thank you. So the first question is from Bernie, and if you're happy to read that one out.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for that talk there, Ian. But as a committee, we are here to obviously scrutinise, and and my question, obviously, is we need to know why, after all the adjustments covered by the authorised expenditure were dealt with fire doors, were only identified as an issue, and it required a separate decision from the unauthorised expenditure and was addressed too late in the process.
First of all, thank you very much indeed. And just in answer to your statement before you asked your question, you're absolutely right to scrutinise, because actually that's where also part of the learning comes from, and you challenging. It's easy for us to work with cabinets and with the leader, etc., and doing this, but actually having that level of scrutiny and having that conversation is really important. So please don't feel shy about it. I'm very happy to. I'm very frustrated about doing it, not because of you asking me the questions, but because I'm in the position where I need to, if I'm really honest with you. I think when your question was addressed so late, not too late, if I may, because you said too late, but actually in your question it does say so late. And I emphasise that because the fire doors is something which I approved. And the reason I approved it was, originally, part of the spec was around the fire doors. But then what happened was that when building control, and the detail's in there, but the building control came and looked, and they said, actually, the fire doors that are there no longer are fit for, and I'll just give you between 22 and 24, there were significant changes in respect of building control legislation arising from the Building Safety Act in 2022. I think it said 1922, it's 2022. And the officers employed by tendering of this building control team therefore identified that, and actually we were using another councils as well, building control officers, to say actually the doors which are then there are no longer deemed to be fit for purpose. We could have argued the point, to be honest, because they were fire doors. But actually, I'm not going to argue the point on fire doors on a building where we've got temporary accommodation. If they say building control says to me, those doors aren't fit for purpose because the legislation has changed and we're now saying they need to be of a better spec, even though the original doors had fire doors on them and had been used previously, the spec had increased. I'm not going to argue with that, because if you then have a fire and God forbid somebody was injured or worse, and we said we didn't react, I would rather be sitting here justifying having to authorise additional expenditure on fire doors than sitting here explaining, or to a court explaining, a far more tragic incident if we don't do it. We only have to look at some of the tragedies which we've heard over the last few years around buildings where if there's not been the appropriate fire doors and appropriate systems in place, then that's what's happened. there's more detail in there, but I would just say to you is that whatever the position, and that's why it is later, whatever the position, that is something I would have done regardless of what that is, because that needed to be managed immediately.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you have any
Yeah,
supplementary?
thank you for that. What's become more apparent is that the fire doors and cupboard doors as well, and the amount that you had, it seemed to cover the cost a little bit more logically. Because my understanding was it was like for around about 5 fire doors or something like that, at a cost of £60,000, which seemed to be an awful lot of money.
Right. Well, if I may, the those fire doors are actually very expensive for that very reason. However, as we say here, there were 30 flat entrance doors, 19 cross corridor doors, and a single and 2 pairs of double service cupboard doors. There was also, as I understand it, and now I'm not an engineer and I'm not an architect, so I can't. So I'm now going to be kind of just be led by the paperwork which I've got, but also in terms of the framework which you do when you put the fire doors in, they also have to obviously be compliant. It's no good having a bit of 4x2 putting in a fire door, because it's just going to go around it and burn it out. So that's why. So as per your responses, it's the number of them were um, a bit more than what we said. So
Okay, so does anyone else have any points they want to raise to that question?
No, that's fine, thank you.
thank you.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah.
So presumably one of the things that we've learned from this is that, you know, specifications should address current legislation, and that by using specialists to write these specifications, that should be the case, shouldn't it? Because I think that's what
Yeah.
was missed, wasn't it? That we didn't adapt to the current legislation.
Very well put, Councillor Cousins. Probably better than I just put it, but yes, I think the other thing is when you look at the original piece of work which was done and planned when Councillor Honeywood was the portfolio holder, that was pre the legislation, which, as I say in here, came in. So the original spec actually wouldn't have had those in anyway, because at that time we had fire doors in there. That became that those fire doors were no longer seen to be fit for purpose. So that's why we had to change it. But your principal point about making sure the specification, which is one of the learning points in here, about making sure that is accurate, reduces the amount of variations, reduces the amount of focus on, not focus, that's the wrong word, the amount of where you've got to revisit what is in your spec, and that costs money. And that always increases your cost. Now, there's going to be a bit of that, but as you rightly say, for the most part, good quality specifications, and that's why part of the new team is making sure that we do a much better. The other thing which we are doing is using the Essex procurement partnership, and we're actually procuring a lot better. And actually, a lot of that work across the whole of Essex is with credit to Lisa Hastings, who has been very much leading that for across Essex around the Essex procurement partnership as well. And a number of authorities now are desperate to join that. There's only some authorities, because of the work that's doing.
Thanks for that. Does anyone else have any points on that question? Okay, can we go to question 2 then, which is Bernie again?
I think we're back to, I think my next 2 questions have actually been answered in the last, to be honest. I think we have, yeah. I think you can move on to the... I think we can definitely shut the door on that, yeah. Shut the door on the whole project, I think.
Are you happy with all of that? Yeah, okay, that's
Yeah,
fine.
perfectly happy, yeah.
No problem. So the next question is question 4, which is from myself. Why were the Cabinet not made aware of the issues before the May 2024 report? In relation to the numerous times that concerns surrounding spenders were raised, why is none of that mentioned in the report?
Thanks, Councillor Honeywood. So, in terms of I'll just sort of read the response there. The Corporate Director and Portfolio Holder were advised of the expenditure issues at the end of February 2024. They immediately commenced a review of the issues and took action, including the omission of battery storage that had been contemplated and review of other expense areas. This was to mitigate some of those costs. And the detailed work around the fireworks, which was formalised, as we've just discussed before. And then as far as then possible, in the May, it was then formalised, sorry, as then as far as possible in the May 2024 report. This report, which I asked for it to be done, was not about laying blame as to when was somebody going to tell who or what. This report was about our learning, about saying, what did we get wrong as officers? What did we do about it? And what we're going to do about it in the future? Now, I would say that every meeting I've been to talk about this, I've been very honest that we've got some of this wrong and where it is. But what we haven't done and didn't do as part of this report is to say who, start saying it was becoming a blame game. That's not what this council does. It's what we do as learning. So I think that the learning we've got from this has been really important. The conversations we've had with the audit committee has been really important, and the work. If you want to ask the portfolio holder that, I will leave that for you. But I'm going to say to you, this report, which I bringing back to you tonight, is about saying what did we do wrong, and what have we done to put it right.
Okay. So, are you aware of any feedback to the Cabinet once this was identified?
So, as I say, in February 2024, that was when the expenditure issues were raised, and at that stage, the conversations with the portfolio holder, that's when all the discussions were going ahead, and then it was reported back to Cabinet in May 2024.
Thank you for that. I've just got a couple more bits. Obviously, when we looked at it, the capital budget spend was 2.387 million. What was mentioned in previous conversations was the fact that Spendles not being opened was costing around £22,800 per month. And then the first families moved into Spendles on the 4th of December 2024. So are we aware of the cost of that delay?
So I think that there is not delay because of the spend which was unauthorised, because the work carried on. In actual fact, that was part of the problem. The work did carry on without actually getting the authorisation to do it. But the cost of this error did not create the spend issue, the spend issue. The cost of the delay in terms of getting open, you can see from the report, there's various different things in terms of the issues. Had it not opened, it would have still been an empty building and of course still been costing us money. So I don't think you can equate, there's not an equation to say what would have been the cost had we stopped, got those permissions, and in fact it would have probably increased, as opposed to not having that building and never used it as temporary accommodation. Obviously, not using it as temporary accommodation would have cost us an extra £200,000 to £250,000. So if you put that together, that you can actually say is that there is, this report does not say that cost, which is the equation. What you're asking though is the length of time it took to do the project. That's not part of this report to say what the length of time was. There are other reasons why there were length of time. Some of which we've discussed was around, obviously, as a materials, as about additional works, and the findings which came from those. I would say you could be right, and we'll never know the exact, as if the specification right at the beginning, when it was very first mooted, had been better, whether that would have made the project quicker. I can't answer you that because I don't know.
Does anyone have any comments on the question? Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it on? Is it on?
You're on.
Right, okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. I think I mean, I don't want to go into the minutiae of fire doors and etc. And you know, from where I sit, I see that yes, I think there could have been, you know, a better specification of this building. I think that, you know, looking back on the previous report, I think that there was issues with the electricity being upgraded. I think there was problems with the drainage, or there
I
was
didn't go
something.
into the detail.
No, and I think, well, okay, was there adequate surveys? Was there cameras put down? You know, drainage, etc. We might have uncovered some of the issues, etc. And did we receive all of that? So I think that, you know, in terms of scoping the actual project, I think that clearly there was a shortfall there, in my opinion. I think that in, you know, from a you know, working in the public sector, you know, it is incredibly frustrating sometimes to see and compare the public sector and the way that we handle projects and the way that it's done with a local authority or government or whatever type of organisation. It is different because you're dealing with public money and you're dealing with residents' money, and that's what makes it different. And there's different rules. But it's the frustrating thing for me is there's a perception, well, it's somebody else's money, we can just go ahead and spend it, rightly or wrongly. And there's also the length of time that decisions, you know, take to. I'm a managing director of a business. I can make a decision, pull the directors together, we make a decision, bang, we go, and we can make a decision very, very quickly, and we can respond to changing circumstances. I think that the thing that I'd like to understand is the process around, you know, in terms of management. What is the process once extra work is found? Now, I work in the vehicle repair industry, and we repair some very prestigious cars. And you know, if we you know, if we find there's an extra £5,000 worth of work because there's a steering rack and mechanism, etc., and it's a £30,000 repair, but the car's worth 100,000. You know, we know that it's going to get authorised. You're not going to stop the repair or the project because of that. But we have a system in place whereby management would look at it, we'd get the justification, we'd take the images, and then we'd seek authorisation. But management would say, yes, go ahead with it. So it doesn't slow the vehicle repair up, etc. What's the system in place where, and we've already said through the chairman as well, that we wouldn't want to cause any delays because that's going to add a cost. What's the management process in terms of once more work has been identified, where's the management control in terms of somebody saying, yes, go ahead with that, and then I'll go and speak to cabinet or whoever to make that decision, please?
Okay, so I'm going to pick up the first part of what you said, and then sort of go on to that. So thank you for that, because it just gives me an opportunity to voice this. I think that the difference between, as you rightly say, the public sector as opposed to the private sector is we are using taxpayers' money. And I think that most people in the private sector would be most upset if we didn't have proper processes and governance, procurement, and all that sort of thing to ensure that their money is kept safe. I think that therefore sometimes the systems are a bit slower than in as you know, I used to have a company as well. I used to work in the private sector and company as well, and it is much easier because you actually just say, go and do that, and I'll write a check. It's not our money just to go and write a check. You want to make sure you've had the best possible processes in place. You want to make sure that the money's protected. There is another thing which is a little matter of also, we have elected members, and I say that sort of very tongue-in-cheek because that's really important. But they are very much a part of that process. And in order to have for members to have a process, because they're not professionals in this field or in the field in which they're portfolio holders or in any part of local government, they are elected representatives of the people. And when they need to make a decision, they need to have a report before them. That report needs to say what is their decision. That report needs to say what are their options. And that report needs to say what they're doing is legal. Now, so in terms of when it's identified, an officer, let's use this as a scenario, would go to their senior officer and say, then we've got a problem here. This spec's not got X or Y in it, and what's the cost? That report would then come through to probably the director, who would talk to the portfolio holder and talk to the finance portfolio holder, depending on the level of spend as to where it goes. Obviously, it could be it's a officer decision, but you could talk to the portfolio holder. It could be a portfolio holder decision. It could be cabinet decision, or it could even be council, depending on the amount. But that always has, as we know with a cabinet process, it always has a little bit more of a lag time than being able to have a management team on at your company and then saying, here's a check, go and sign and get on with it. So absolutely recognise that, but that's the protection. The other thing which we have is the Constitution which lays out what those rules are, both for officers and for members, in terms of their approval process and who can approve what. So I think that in this case, I don't think actually it's the timing of it, because this was actually spend which they didn't go through that process. It's almost the other way around. But your question around more generally, does it sometimes hold up the situation? There will be times when it may feel slower than if it's in the private sector, but that's for very good reasons of protecting public money. I think we also need to work through and look at when we're doing such projects, is that going right back to the beginning of the specification. If you've got the specification right and you've got the funding all agreed and it's correct, that's a bit quicker, because of course the specification being right means you haven't got to go back for further funding. So therefore that would make it quicker. But I think in general terms that would be a general approach to the project. But in this case, the spec would have probably been. But having said that, I don't think, if you look at the dates of this, when we started in 2017, 2018 with Councillor Honeywood, nobody could have foreseen the COVID, the costs of everything going like that. So having done the spec, I think there still would have been needing to go back for additional funds and time.
Thank you for that. I think Lisa wanted to comment.
I was just going to respond to also support the Chief Executive in explaining within our Constitution we have got special urgency provisions. The fire door decision was made on the day we were made aware of it. So, if an officer comes across an issue and needs authority to do something which is outside of their normal remit and the delegations they've already got, whether it's for the portfolio holder or for the director or a senior manager officer, then the chief exec and the leader can make urgent decisions following consultation with Richard and myself. So we do make decisions on the day that we're aware of it, if it's appropriate to do so in that instance. The other thing as well is that, with regards to not only the Constitution, but we have to work with the legislation that sits around local government. And we are required to publish notification of decisions for 28 days notice. However, again, there are special urgency provisions that apply that in consultation with the chairman of the relevant overview and scrutiny committee, you can request exemption from that 28-day period, and you can request exemption from calling. And as long as you're, as an officer, you're satisfying those requirements within the email or letter that goes to the chairman of the relevant committee, then those exemptions are given. So there is plenty of opportunities within both local government legislation and the Constitution to respond to things when we need to very quickly. And I will say it frustrates me when the governance process and the time that it takes to make decisions is used for a reason why decisions weren't obtained, because we will pull out all the stops we can to make sure urgent decisions are made when they need to be.
If I may, Chairman, just to say, it's actually a good point, because actually that's what I used to do the fire doors, so it's a good reminder. I think that going back to it, those processes, whether it be for the urgency or whether it be for kind of the procurement process we need to go through, again goes back to protecting the taxpayers' money.
Peter?
Thank you. Listening to both officers here, what we're saying is that there is a robust process in place, but if we look at this particular case, then there was a failure somewhere within that, and that's how we've come to this sort of overspend or this sort of unauthorised spend, should I say?
Yeah.
So, which is being looked at and dealt with. But we would have spent that money anyway. Chances are, it's not as though that money was spent, irrationally, etc. It was a decision, and perhaps the individual involved. I'm not going to go into it too much, but we thought he was making the right decision at the time, but just didn't follow the process and the rules. So that aside, that's So the question is does anything need to be reviewed, or I noticed that you put training, etc. Does that unauthorised spend managers should be aware of their constitutional responsibilities. I would change that to must be aware of constitutional responsibilities, Chair, through that one. But for me, again, the questions as a taxpayer is the length of time the process. I think from 2017 to 2024, I think when it eventually opened up, was that 6-7 years. Was a hell of a time to take that length of time, and well, I think. I think in terms of the cost, would we have authorised the cost at 2.4 million at that time? I guess we'll never know that. But in terms of the overall project, it's a brilliant project. It's worthwhile. We mustn't forget, as the Chief Executive has said that at the beginning. And at the end of the day, the money this council spends on a monthly basis, looking after those that are in need of something like this, far outweighs this cost, and we mustn't forget that. And then, to be honest, if we had another 3 or 4 spindles, that's what we need, and that's what we should be focusing on, I think. Thank you.
Can I respond to Councillor Harris? First of all, thank you for that. I really do appreciate that, because I absolutely agree with you. And would we have spent it? Well, you only have to look at the 200 to 250,000. The payback period is there, and you would always do that for 2 reasons. One is, as I've said at the beginning, is obviously the financial position, but also in terms of for the individuals and their support networks being local, good quality accommodation, as opposed to, unfortunately, some there. Your point around what do we do going forward in the future, absolutely agree with you. I think that's going to be a real issue, and it's not going to be a real issue for tendering, it's going to be a real issue for this country, because temporary accommodation is going up and up and up, and for some authorities now it's 40 to 50% of their budgets. And the reason for that is because the cost of accommodation in more expensive areas is so high. But a lot of those authorities, what do? Is they actually ship them out to much farther afield, which destroys, if it's mental health issues, if it's children at school, it destroys those networks as well. And where's that cost go? It goes back to ultimately, it goes back to the public sector system, because you're then creating other costs in part of the system, which is because you haven't got good quality temporary accommodation. And the support, I think, is going to be so important is from government with temporary accommodation, and I would say this, and I actually said it at the LGA conference, is about how do we stop reacting to addressing temporary accommodation and proactively address temporary accommodation. Because if we know it's ever rising, if we know it's going up, let's keep doing spot financing of it, which is only going to cost us a fortune, and actually have good quality accommodation at the ready. And it's even worth, if you do the maths, never mind doing the right thing, it's even worth having accommodation where you may have some empty, because still it's reducing the cost, and actually, doing the sums, even if you're carrying some empty, well, that's actually a good thing, because it means your temporary accommodation's going down a bit. But even if you do, it's unlikely to be less. So, I would certainly advocate exactly that. We do need more, not less.
Lisa and then Mike.
I was just going to respond to Councillor Harris's comment about training, and completely agree with you that the officers must have the training. And yeah, just picking up the bits and pieces here. So I totally agree with you that they must have the training, and can I reassure the committee that the training is delivered? So, we have a robust training process in place. It's repeated. We've done it again recently at the Senior Managers Forum, which is referenced in the paperwork. Myself and my team, we go out to team meetings, we do it online, we do it in person, so it's something I would much rather spend my time doing training for officers than having to respond to this situation.
If I may, on that, Chairman, I think that and thank you, Lisa, for she mops up when I miss everything. You see, when we sort of pick that up, there is also, which we're reiterating with staff, and there are implications if you don't actually fulfil those requirements. I don't want to be sitting here in front of you talking about what went wrong. I'm going to be sitting here in front of you talking about, as I say, celebrating success, not justifying it.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And firstly, thanks for the report in. It's very, very helpful. I've just read through it time and time again. But first and foremost, it's just really what you started off this evening, the importance of quality temporary accommodation. We can't undervalue what's on the outcome, or I suppose the main objective is that we've got this quality. But that doesn't detract from it being a bit of a dog's ear in terms of the project contract. And when you look at that process, I don't like witch hunting, because, if there was some blatant stuff they've carried out here, then maybe there's an issue. But for me, being in this industry 40 odd years, it's fundamental basic principles that weren't set out right. We've got a JCT contract, there, a standard form of contract, and we go back to these recommendations, and I think they're excellent. This is almost like a good practice template now, going forward. It's not exhaustive, but it's a massive big hit. Then we start reading the detail of that, what went wrong. And it's from the first principles, from the day you scope and provide a specification, identify what you're trying to achieve. Now, I honestly don't think the council, we've got such a complex business. We deliver so much, but what we are not, and we have to admit that sometimes, in-house, we are not contract project management experts. And I think this has really brought this to the fore. And what's more important going forward, as Ian said, the project implementation team, when we look at LUF funding, 60 million, because if we've got problems like this with a 50% overspend, because we couldn't determine it right, can you imagine we're looking like at 25, 50 million? So taking these proactive actions going forward, I would like to see within these sort of recommendations or observations that we talk about training, we talk about templates, but right from the outset, for me, in a project like this, it would be, we often try to cut a corner to say, well, let's get a specification now. This is what we know. But when you're into these sort of projects, you just can't do that. And that might be a cost. And sometimes we don't want to pay that front-end professional cost. But bottom end, at the end of the project, it will probably have saved you money, and it probably will save potential a lot of heartache. There will be contingencies, unknowns, and things that change. For example, the fire doors, I would still question that if we had a clerk or a chartered surveyor or an architect, before we submitted that contract, we could probably have looked and say building regs has changed. Because we don't have that expertise, and whether it's through engineering consultancy, structural, civils, and if we need that team to actually make certain we get it right from the first principles, it makes the journey a lot easier, because as far as I'm concerned, this was a painful journey. And this project, to me, is an example of not how to manage a project. But I think what we've learned from that, we can use this going forward. And I really welcome the detail of that, because it's open, candid, uncut. It shows where we're at. But I say, for me, I don't like seeing people being sort of singled out, because if the process is not solid enough, a template, then we can't blame culture for me. And I've been in this industry a long time. We shouldn't be doing that. We've got to address what the procedures and processes are and the governance. And if we get that right, and it is a difficult one when you're into these sort of projects, the complexity of it all and the speed of getting it done. I mean, but if we get that front end right, and with this robust, what you talk about training and all of that, for me, I think this is a really good report. We should take this on board and saying, this is what we can get wrong, but we know what we've got to do now. And I think this is massive. And I appreciate that, Ian.
If I may, first of all, thank you for that. And I think that as a council, one of the things is, if nothing else, we are very honest. There are a lot of councils who don't ever do Section 5, don't ever sort of say, hey, I've got it wrong, don't ever come to you and apologise when we do get it wrong, which I have done tonight. And I think, and also when we spoke at Cabinet as well, Councillor Honeywood, I'm sure will remember, because there's nothing wrong with saying, I got it wrong, we haven't got all this right. I think that the governance and the arrangements in our constitution are good. It is about the training. It is about making sure that actually people do follow them. And I think you're right about the spec and actually not thinking that within house have we always got the skills. And that's why I think the new team is going to be so important to make sure we don't have those same trips on the luck. If you get a chance, or perhaps you may want to, but actually listening to the audit committee meeting to hear David Ousby talk about the processes and the work which he's doing at the moment, because that was very impressive, and he followed on from my presentation at the audit committee, which is obviously about the same report. There's two different roles. Obviously, Scrutiny has one role in this, and Audit Committee has another, and we're dealing, and we're responding to both. But I think that the other question will be, and I think not putting words in your mouth, but they're there. But have we followed through on that learning? Well, we're going to go back to Audit Committee and talk about the other learning. There will be other reports where we will say, actually, we got that wrong, and we can add to this learning. And Richard, I think it was, who at the audit committee talked about making sure that, as you rightly say, and thank you for that, about the document and about how we did there, but what can we add to it? What can we say, actually, we also need to make sure we do fill in the blanks, whatever it might be, so that every project we do that kind of review. Councillor Honeywood at Cabinet asked about having that type of review. Well, actually, I think we should be doing a review of what happens in major projects every time, because then that way you pick up and say, what could we have done better? Now, it may be marginal, it might be it might be something very small, or it might be something bigger, and it's not, nobody should ever be embarrassed about
Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to sort of add my thanks really tonight, if I may Chair, for our Chief Executive and our Corporate Director to come here this evening to sit in front of this committee to discuss this, which was is a major project, and and there's some sort of controversial sort of issues that are being discussed, and I'd like to thank both officers for coming here to do that. But I would like to add that it is disappointing not to see the leader, and if the leader couldn't have made it here, another cabinet member here to talk about this and to discuss this, and perhaps sit in front of this committee. I just wanted to make the point that I don't know the reasons why there's nobody here, but I find it disappointing that there isn't a cabinet member or the leader here this evening.
Thank you. Ian.
Councillor Harris, really appreciate your comments, and you will always find that I'm very straightforward with you, as you always know, and I can't comment on why the leader of the cabinet or a member of the cabinet not here.
Thank you. Question 5 is Graham. I think a lot of points have been raised.
Yeah, well, I think everything's covered, actually. I think everything in my questions and the answers, and a little bit more tonight, has been covered. So maybe I'll just chuck a supplementary in then. I'm not trying to catch you out, honest. You mentioned David Ousby, who gave the presentation to you, which was very weighty, very, very good. And that's about the project delivery unit and also the project initiation document. So my question is really it was a very busy document with a lot of information on, but how flexible is that? And what is the process if it needs to be changed? And where does the portfolio involvement come into that process? Because I notice on there is a working group which the frequency of meeting is to be arranged. So that probably needs to be, and little things like that probably needs to be sort of looked at and updated. I don't know how quick we can update them, but taking Councillor Harris's point of view is how can we get things quicker and make decisions a bit quicker.
Really, really good and interesting point, actually. The when I say the £60 million project, the actual within that there are a whole series of projects. There's a lot of projects in there, which is really good at one level, but it does mean that you're managing a lot of projects at another level. So I think that some of the projects actually will need a lot more focus and time. Whereas one, if you've got one is, let me be silly, sort of say one's 500 quid and one's, you know, £500,000. You're not going to put that sort of level of that into a £500, but you are going to the £500,000. You're going to have light touch for the £500. You're going to have serious amounts for the 500,000. So I think in terms of your question and what David presented and the structure there, I think it will be a little bit of horses for courses. So I don't think it will be that every minutiae in terms of for the lesser, but for the greater. I think the other thing with in terms of the overarching project is it's about giving you that assurance that that structure is in place and it can be flexed and it can be used depending on what we've got there. I know that's a little bit of a fudge answer because of course it would depend on the individual. May I answer your other question, which is on here, because I just realised that there was another one there, and I did actually say this in the other presentation. I didn't this way. At no stage do I think there was malicious action in there. At no stage do I think it was a malicious. It was malicious. It was actually there was there was fault, there was errors, but I think that what was there was no gain from anybody. In actual fact, the budget was there. We're actually still spending the money, and you would have spent the money. So it's not that that's like certain other councils you've heard about where perhaps the money's gone elsewhere. This is not about that. This is about this. So in answer to your question, absolutely, there was not. I don't believe it was in any way malicious. I think it was well, I'm not going to go back over the report. Well, I can do, but if you want, but
Thank you. One of the questions you asked Councillor Steady was about portfolio holder involvement in those project initiation documents. And we've been consulted on the process too, and I specifically asked for the portfolio holder to be involved in signing off those project initiation documents, because essentially as officers we are delivering the policy of the council's cabinet, so that's, you know, making sure that there is that sign off. But then, you know, in the same respect, you'd expect any variation to be run past the portfolio holder as well, you know, so that officers then weren't going off script, as it were, with regards to the project. But I see that as quite an agile process. You know, it's a matter of phone calls and just having a chat and getting an email sent and saying, you know, following our conversation earlier, do you agree to this? Yes. You know, I really don't see it as being a long drawn out process. The only caveat I would say on that, and it sort of does go back to the Spendle situation again, you know, when we set up the delegations from Cabinet, you know, Richard and I do quite a bit of work to make sure that there is quite a large scope on how a team can work with that delegation. You know, so there's going to be some red lines. You know, there's going to be a red line on the amount of money. You know, there's going to be a red line that you make sure you're delivering against the funding requirements that have come down from government. But as long as you're acting within those red lines and the delegation that Cabinet set out, it should be a very agile process. But it is about that communication.
Can I just thank Lisa for picking up again when I missed something?
Thank you for that. Graham, is there any other point? Obviously, there were your, I think, 5 and 6 were pretty much covered, but is there anything else you want to? Okay, then. I think that the last question we have on this part then is back to Bernie, who started it all off.
Hello,
I'm
once
very
again.
happy to have the question, if I may. I think I have answered about variations, but I'm very happy to talk a bit more about it if you want.
Yeah. Well, well, the 40 variations, yeah, it seems quite high. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, and I'm very happy to comment on that, because I think it goes back to what we've said about and what Councillor Bush said in terms of his long experience as well. If you have a better spec, you shouldn't have so many variations. You will get variations on big projects. It's almost inevitable, but 40, it was a lot. And actually, you know, there's a weird thing around timing. Would the fact that it started pre-COVID and then post-COVID, would that have meant variations? Well, possibly around pricing, possibly around sort of some of the types of fitments and the increase in temporary accommodation going on. But in terms of the actual building spec and work, shouldn't have done, because the building was the building. It was the same building before COVID and after COVID. So yes, it was an above average, I think, in terms of variations. What does it better? Well, you know, as Councillor Bush says, I've said, and as Councillor Harris said, it's all about actually good planning beforehand and having that team in place to make sure that your specification picks up some of those points. There will always be things. I mean, you look at when we had Allwell Pace and then suddenly found that there was tanks full of oil underneath the ground. We could never have known they were there. You look at when we had the kind of, you know, sometimes you get contamination places. You can never know that's going to be there until you work on it. But variations on some of the things which were on here, they were more basic. So yeah, I'd agree with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Mike?
Thanks, Chairman. Just to come back on that, I think one of the areas in the review and outcomes and that was that it seemed like the contractor was like the tail wagging a dog in terms of the applications, the funding, and was reacting to their system, which I still can't fully understand how that occurred, because under a JCT contract, we are the client and it should be driven by us. And so when they submit either it's a monthly application with variations, it should be like we're in control of what's going on there and measuring it out. It just seems like, and I don't want to get into sort of like the operational side of it, but it just seems like they just firing this stuff in, and maybe our experience and expertise couldn't really qualify it at them early doors. And I think, again, part of this is this learning. And I mean, going forward, as I said, I'll go to back to this report, and for me, this is almost like developing a good practice guide of how to project manage. We just need to continually build on that. Okay.
I agree.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Lisa?
No, yeah, I'm going to start grilling now. No, what I was going to say is that Councillor Bush completely agree with you, and the new Procurement Act that's been in force now since February, the government guidance, which was started by the former government and the current government are running along with it. They talk about 4 phases to the procurement exercise, and actually, you know, there's plan as being the first phase, defining as the second phase, procuring is the third, so it's the third of the 4, and then there's manage. You've got to be able to contract manage, you know, and there's a lot of emphasis on, you know, the first 2 and the last one, you know, because you can have the best document in the world, but, you know, if you're not using it, then it's of no relevance. The other thing I'd say is that through Essex Procurement, We are using a more of a specialist with regards to construction projects as well, so they can give guidance. In addition to the support that David Ousby was talking about within the project delivery unit, we've also now got an interim construction contract specialist as well that we're using. So I think, you know, with those sorts of giving the committee reassurance that, yeah, not only have we learned from this project, but we'd already started to put some of that in place already, recognising as an organisation we need to resource these projects, and resourcing is not just money, it's also making sure you've got the right people at the right phases. So, yeah, so that's the sort of rounded view on that.
Chairman, if I may, just to reiterate though, the Essex procurement and the success of that, the development of that, has been largely thanks to Lise from the work she's been doing as well. So I think there's a big thank you and recognition of that work which she's done across Essex and is recognised by many councils as well for the value of it.
Okay, thank you for that. Is everybody happy now? Excellent. Okay, well, on this part of the agenda, it only leaves me to thank you for coming along this evening and thank you for your full and frank responses to the questions of the committee. It's appreciated.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. And one thing, rest assured, I will always be honest when we get something wrong and shout from the rooftops when we get it right. So you've seen me do both. So that's, yeah, I mean, we always need to be very upfront, and that's the way we do learning. And that's this, you know, that's why having these sorts of reports come out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, we've got a little bit more to go on the agenda. So you're more than welcome to stay if you'd like to, or if you'd like.
I'd say it's a really kind offer, Chairman, but if I may.
Thanks very much for coming. So, thank you. Obviously, we need to make some recommendations on this. And while we've been talking, Keith has kindly come up with a few words, which it's written in Keith rather than English. So if I get him to read it out, to see what you think.
I'm tempted to do a funny voice and support your version of what I've written down. But returning to that, you've got on page 18, that the committee notes the decision of the audit committee, and the chief executive referred to that, and this 6-month update that committee will be receiving. In respect of the further recommendations or further decisions of this committee, I think in picking up from the discussion that you want to thank the Chief Executive and the corporate directors for the investigation that was undertaken, the report that you've got before you, and their attendance at the meeting this evening, which has been very helpful to the committee and its inquiry. So go on. That you welcome the conclusions in the Chief Executive's report as a blueprint for project and contract management at the Council going forward. And finally, that you look forward to addressing the political oversight in the later stages of this project as part of the proposed special meeting with the leader and relevant cabinet members as agreed earlier.
Happy with that? Peter?
Just referring to page 25 when we were talking about training, and the authorised spend managers should, you know, it says managers should be aware. I want to change that to must. So we just, I know we've received reassurance from the corporate director, but I think that we should underline that you know, adequate training for officers must be provided before taking on any project.
Paul, if you're okay, we'll incorporate that into the welcomes and conclusions in the Chief Executive's report, subject to the adjustment of the reference in the training element to must.
Okay, I'm happy with that. Is everybody else? Okay, thank you.
formally,
We've got
Chair-
item
Chair-
7, yeah.
formally, Chairman, just on item 6, if it hadn't been recorded, then effectively you're deferring that item, and that you're going to, request a special meeting with the leader of the council and relevant cabinet members to discuss the detail in that.
Yes, that was the decision we made, and then also to revisit item 5 from a political perspective.
And that's just been picked up.
Yeah.
So you've now got that.
It's item 7, which is report of the assistant. I'll report of the assistant director, corporate policy and support work programme for 24-25, including the monitoring of previous recommendations and summary of forthcoming decisions, which is pages 47 to 70.
Chairman, with your agreement, this is your standard report. The detail in the report also covers the update or the intended sort of summary of the work that will be involved in developing ideas for the work programme for 25-26, and how you will be critical to developing that and submitting a finalised version to full council in July. Appendix A sets out your existing work programme, and including those elements that have been completed. You can see that substantially that's progressing as you would expect. Appendix B is the recommendations monitoring, and you can see there that there are the responses back from Cabinet back in September last year and in November to 2 sets of recommendations that you have submitted. I'm not intending to go over those here, and Appendix C are proposed decisions, and certainly it's probably worth referencing Treasury and the Treasury strategy, which will be coming back to this committee at some point. We'll integrate that into the 2025-26 work programme, together with looking at the financial outturn and the budget preparation for 26-27. The last point on page 70 is also the Careline contracts matter, which is identified in the work programme Appendix A, where with the consent of the chairman of the committee, in essence, that item is being added to your work programme, and that is being timed for your next meeting on the basis that those transitional arrangements will be in a position to be considered on the 1st of July. And if those transitional arrangements are agreed or in a position to be agreed much earlier than that, then again there will be a special meeting of this committee to make sure you have the opportunity of scrutinising those transitional arrangements prior to implementation.
Thank you for that. Does the recommendations for this are on page 50? Does anyone have any comments? Thoughts? No? So I'm happy to move those as written. Anybody propose? Do I need a proposer and seconder? Are you the proposer? Do I need a seconder?
I do need to propose and seconder.
Yes, you can propose if you want. If that makes you feel better. Can I have a proposer and seconder? Oh, I've got 2 in the corner there. Okay, are we all happy with that? Okay, thank you very much. On the agenda, which is date of the next meeting, which at the moment is set for 1st of July, I believe.
It is, Chairman, on the basis of a intended decision by full council to approve its meetings schedule. It would be the 1st of July. Obviously, you have also got the potential of a special meeting, or not potential, you've requested a special meeting with the leader, and there may also be this special meeting in relation to Careline transition, if those arrangements are in a position to be considered ahead of the 1st of July.
Okay, so that's where we are. So I'd like to, at this point, close the meeting and thank everybody for coming along this evening. Thank you.